So the 1DX Mark III just got officially announced, and following my review of the 1DX Mark II, I thought I'd make a short video to share my thoughts. I haven't yet got my hands on the camera, so expect a full review in the future. While it hasn't really had a redesign on the outside, there's quite a lot of new features on the inside. So what's new? The main reason I'm excited for this camera is the improved video features. RAW 12-bit 422 5.5K video. It's incredible that Canon have given us this, despite the fact that RAW video has always been a cinema camera exclusive, found on the C300 Mark II and the C200 for example. Being able to shoot the entire sensor, pixel for pixel, is incredible. And to add to this, you even have the ability to shoot up to 60 frames a second in RAW. This was something that the C200 was only previously capable of, although you will lose autofocus at 50 and 60p. 5.5K oversampled, 4K uncropped video. This is a feature that should have really been on the 1DX Mark II. The 4K full frame look is just amazing. You can also shoot up to 60 frames a second in 4K full frame, but you will lose autofocus at 50 and 60p. 4K 1.3 crop. This camera offers a feature to crop in at 1.3 times of the sensor to give you a full pixel to pixel 4K readout. If you like the 4K on the 1DX Mark II, this is the same image as before. C-Log 10-bit. Unlike the 1DX Mark II, the Mark III finally gives us C-Log. This should in theory give us more dynamic range. Color grading will be even faster and easier. Improved codecs. The 1DX Mark III is going to give us MP4 video and H.265. The most important part here is that Canon have ditched the Motion JPEG codec. The Motion JPEG codec was an incredibly hard codec to edit and would really require a lot of processing power. So with these new codecs, this should give us more flexibility in camera and make it much easier to edit. Focus peaking and focus assist. These are some great features that Canon should have included in their cameras years ago. This will be helpful in the frame rates that don't offer autofocus. The ability to be able to tell where your focus is in your image and be able to use the focus assist feature for manual lenses is an incredible feature. Dual card PROXY recording. When recording RAW video on this camera, there's a feature to record to both cards, one being the RAW video and one being a PROXY file. This is useful for when you want to edit the PROXY file because you don't have the processing power to edit the RAWs. A new low-pass filter. Canon claimed to have simulated the idea of having no low-pass filter when needed and a low-pass filter when needed, therefore giving cleaner and sharper images. Improved low light. Expandable from ISO 50 to 819,200. Silent shutter. That's right, the 1DX finally gives us a silent shutter. This was something I really wish the 1DX Mark II had when I'm doing jobs that require a quiet camera. Subject and eye autofocus. In both video and stills, Canon have brought the eye autofocus and object tracking to their system when in live view. This is something I was very jealous of Sony A7 users for quite some time, but it's nice that Canon have finally brought it to their system. Built-in Wi-Fi. Previously on the 1DX Mark II, there was no Wi-Fi internal. You had to include a wireless adapter that cost too much and was no good. I'm glad that Canon have brought this feature to the Mark III. Touch autofocus joystick. Now the new touch autofocus joystick on the 1DX Mark II is a new type of joystick that combines the original joystick and the back focus button. It being one button instead of two means you no longer have to transfer between the two buttons. More focus points across the frame. Personally, I think the 1DX Mark II had enough focus points, but more is better with a wider spread. Illuminated buttons. I've never had a need for illuminated buttons, but when I'm out on a night shoot, doing astrophotography, anything like that, I'm sure illuminated buttons would be a great feature. The LP19, the same battery. The 1DX Mark III is going to use the same LP19 battery with the same LP19 charger. Better battery life. Compared to the 1DX Mark II, the Mark III can take considerably more images even though it uses the same battery. This is great as people already have them. Improved HDMI out. The 1DX Mark III can finally output a 4K 10-bit image. The Mark II was restricted to a terrible 1080 codec that was useless. USB-C. This is a nice touch, as I can easily transfer files to my laptop with no need for a card reader. CFast Express and CFast Express Reader included in the box. It's nice for Canon to include these. I know they didn't have to, but they decided to. The digital stabilization. The 1DX Mark III doesn't have IBIS, but does have a digital image stabilization. I've not used this yet, but I'm sure it's usable in the right scenario. It will crop 10% of the image to allow for the stabilization. Lighter. The 1DX Mark III is a few hundred grams lighter. It's not much, but it's something. So what sucks on this camera? No camera is perfect. Canon are always going to hold back on something. The first being that the camera is only 20.1 megapixels. Basically, it's the same sensor as the 1DX Mark II. Well, the same resolution anyway. Personally, I think that maybe like 24, 28, maybe like 30 megapixels would be really nice, but 20 is like just enough. Sadly, like if it were less, I'd be disappointed, but I could deal with it. So the main problem that I think most people will have with this camera is the fact that Canon are dropping dual pixel autofocus when recording in 50 and 60 frames in the 5.5K RAW codec, Cinema 4K full frame 4K codec, and the Ultra HD 4K full frame codec. I know another problem that people will have with this camera is the fact there's no IBIS. Us Canon users have never really had IBIS, even the EOS R didn't have IBIS, so we're kind of used to it by now. I'd hope to see that Canon will introduce something along the lines of IBIS in the near future. No zebras. I don't personally use zebras, but I know that a lot of pro video shooters do, so it's a shame that Canon included focus peaking, but no zebras. EF mount. So one of the controversial decisions of this camera was to include it with an EF mount. While it's fine for most Canon users, as there's a lot more EF glass out there, and people own a lot more EF glass, it would have been nice to see this camera with an RF sensor. Although I imagine if you want to include the RF sensor, you have to go mirrorless. No USB charging. So something that's really nice on the mirrorless cameras is that you can charge through USB. You can use power banks and you can charge through USB-C. This camera now has a USB-C port, but does not offer USB charging. No time-lapse video. So just like on the 1DX Mark II, there's still no time-lapse video feature in this camera, or even an intervalometer of such. It'd be really nice if Canon were to include this, as they include it on their 5D, their 6D, and the 80-90D, and I think it's just a really handy feature to be able to turn out quick time lapses on the go. No audio in 120p. So again, just like on the 1DX Mark II, there is no audio in the 100 and 120 frames. In some ways this is great, as it means you don't have to remove it when you're getting B-roll, but if you for whatever reason have to record video at 100 or 120 frames and you need audio, you're going to need an external recorder. Price. So the price was always going to be huge for the 1DX3, but I was sad to see that it was £1,000 more than the 1DX2 was 4 years ago. CFast Express. CFast Express is, a wicked little fast card that I'm sure is reliable and is a great card for this camera. And in fact, it's probably the only reason this camera can record raw video, but they're expensive and they're hard to find. At the moment, I've had a look and there aren't really too many affordable options around. Insane data rates. So it's kind of a curse and a blessing at the same time. This camera, just like the 1DX Mark II, has pretty high data rates. And while this is great for image resolution and color grading, it means that my hard drive space is still going to suffer, and I'm going to need plenty of cards. To give you an idea of how insane the bit rates are for this camera, looking at the camera's bitrate spec, you can figure out how much card space you might need. To figure this out, you need to understand and not confuse MB per second and megabits per second. Canon are displaying megabits per second, so you have to convert it by dividing by 8. This gives you the MB per second. You then have to times it by 60 and then divide by your camera's card space. For example, 5.5K RAW 60p will need about 325 MB a second, so that's 19.5 gig a minute. So on a 128 gig card, you're looking at about 6.5 minutes of recording. While this seems pretty ridiculous, At least Canon have given us lots of options to choose from, such as the lower bitrate IPB codecs. Therefore, you can choose depending on what's more suitable for the job. And then finally, my last problem with this camera is 29 minutes and 29 second record limit. I know this camera is a stills camera, and I do understand that the video camera features of this have to come second, but I think if we could get an unlimited record time, like found on the 1DC out of the 1DX3, would have been a really nice touch. Although the way around this is to use an external recorder, but we're yet to see what the results are like out the HDMI of this camera. So what does this mean? Well, personally, I think it's quite a nice upgrade for the 1 series. For photo video hybrid shooters, this camera is going to really make a difference to their content. For full-time sports photographers, this camera will also give much better results. I know that many users are a little disappointed, mostly photographers hoping for IBIS, the RF mount and more megapixels. But for me as a hybrid shooter, I think it's almost perfect. I say I think because I haven't actually used the camera yet and won't know fully until I do. But if the camera has an improved photo and video image and can speed up my workflow, I think it's the camera for me. So will I be buying the camera? Not just yet. I'm in no rush and have no absolute need for it at this moment. So in conclusion, I think that Canon have really smashed people's expectations with the 1DX Mark III and actually given us the features that we've been asking for. But they haven't given us everything. In my opinion, I think that Canon have done this for a reason. I think they prefer to keep their older cameras from becoming obsolete by not giving us everything we want all in one package. So is it the perfect camera? It's not, but for the right person, it's pretty damn close. Finally, I'll mention a few questions that I've been thinking. Will there be a Pro EOS R with most of the features for a fraction of the price? Does the camera have a real noticeable improvement in sharpness and dynamic range? Will the CF Express cards become more affordable and available? Will Canon continue to produce EF lenses? Will I regret buying this camera if they only invest in the RF mount in the future? What codec is the raw video in? How difficult will it be to edit these video files? For example, can an entry-level MacBook Pro confidently edit these files? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. See you in the next one.